In this section, we'll look at the first couple of years of the Johnson presidency, 1964 and 1965, when there were a couple of monumental civil rights laws passed. Certainly, when Johnson came to the Oval Office, many people didn't think he'd be active in civil rights. He was an older guy. He appeared older anyway. He's 8 years older than Kennedy, and he's from Texas. And he just seemed the antithesis of Kennedy. The thing was, Johnson had a keen sense that segregation was wrong, and he had a strong desire to leave a legacy. He was also a master of politics, and he realized that Kennedy had become a martyr with his assassination, and thus everything Kennedy stood for was more popular. Johnson therefore began pushing Kennedy's proposed civil rights legislation, and in 1964 he actually got it past Congress. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a true milestone in American civil rights history, the culmination of the nonviolent civil rights movement, and one of the nation's greatest accomplishments according to Congressional Quarterly magazine. It was, the Congressional Quarterly stated, the most sweeping civil rights measure to clear either house of Congress in the 20th century. At its heart was the final dagger at Jim Crow segregation. The law made it illegal to discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, or gender in all public accommodations, both those supported by tax dollars and private businesses that served the public. The former, of course, had begun to fall with the court cases in the wake of Brown decision, but the latter was truly revolutionary. No longer could one deny another a job or service or admission or whatever because of race, creed, color, national origin, or gender. In fact, hoping to derail the legislation, Southern segregationists included females as a protected class, thinking that adding women would get more resistance to the bill and they could defeat it. When the bill passed, the move clearly had backfired on them. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 also strengthened school desegregation laws and created the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, to investigate charges of noncompliance with the law. As Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a more organized and larger effort took place in Mississippi. 1,000 students, both black and white, from over 200 colleges and universities across America traveled in the summer of 1964 to Mississippi to register African American voters. Blacks constituted 42% of the state's population, but only 5% of its registered voters. In addition to registering African Americans, they formed freedom schools to stress African American history and the rights blacks should enjoy in a democracy. Of course, it was dangerous work. As part of the Freedom Summer campaign, 3 young adults, 2 whites and 1 black, vanished. It was 44 days before police, who appeared rather disinterested, found the bodies of Michael Schwerner, Andrew Goodman, and James Chaney in a car ditched in a muddy dam. The incident was the basis for the 1988 movie Mississippi Burning, starring Gene Hackman, but the movie's depiction of a massive federal response was historically inaccurate. While the FBI did become involved in the investigation, state prosecutors were not initially helpful. The U.S. government used the only federal law they could, a civil rights violation, in convicting 3 Klansmen, but not all the conspirators. It really wasn't until 2005 that the state successfully prosecuted for murder anyone involved in the crime. In any event, the prolonged disappearance of the 3 young men and the noncompliance of the state made the case national news. Growing from the 1964 Freedom Summer campaign was an attempt to register enough African Americans in Mississippi to take over the Mississippi Democratic Party. Activists formed the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and threatened to take over the state's party convention and platform. This scared national Democrats, including Johnson, who didn't want the Democratic Party to split between pro-civil rights Northern liberals and the anti-civil rights Southern conservatives, at least ones that were still in the party. Johnson and the national leaders, therefore, worked out a compromise whereby the Mississippi Democratic Party would seat more black members and reflect more black concerns if the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party would cease and desist. The compromise ended the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, but didn't please many of the younger black activists who were becoming more radical with the frustration of all the establishment politics. With passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference also turned to the problem of voting rights. They chose Selma, Alabama as the center of their protest. Selma had been at the forefront of resistance to black voting, just as Birmingham had kind of been in the forefront of resistance to desegregation. In January 1965, King organized marches to the Dallas County Courthouse in Selma that prevented thousands of arrests. He then convened a march from Selma to Montgomery, the state capital, on March 7, 1965. When state troopers and Selma police, under the direction of racist Sheriff Jim Clark, attacked and pursued the marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, national outrage was the result. Joined by hundreds of white clergymen, SCLC leaders marched again on March 21st. But more importantly, Johnson, a week earlier, had addressed Congress to urge enactment of a new voting rights legislation. The marches were clearly influential in convincing Johnson to support new voting legislation, and today the route is memorialized as the Selma to Montgomery Voting Rights Trail and designated as a National Historic Trail. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was the second great accomplishment of the nonviolent civil rights movement, along with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 the year before. The law provided for federal supervision of state elections, even allowing the Attorney General the power to appoint federal registers to register voters where discrimination continued. No longer would segregationist and racist state officials be able to thwart black voting with electoral administration. The Civil Rights Act required federal approval for all changes in regulations and voting requirements, including congressional districts in these states with a history of racial discrimination. Almost all of these states were in the South. It was this latter provision that the Supreme Court invalidated in the case of Shelby County versus Holder in 2013. The court held that their pre-clearance requirements did not match present realities. The decision, of course, remains controversial today. Like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 had an immediate and profound impact. For the first time, African Americans began to appear in local and state politics, especially in the South. The number of blacks holding office in the South swelled from fewer than 24 in 1964 to nearly 1,200 in 1972. Notably, blacks held half the seats on the Selma City Council. This includes the section on the twin pillars of the nonviolent civil rights movement, the accomplishments of Johnson in 1964 and 1965, the Civil Rights Act of 64, and the Voting Rights Act of 65.